Not to be pedantic, Hammer, but if you're manually creating zombies with voodoo on a one-by-one basis, it's not really a plague, is it? Hi guys, so I was really looking forward to watching Plague of the Zombies, partly because I'm a big Hammer fan, partly because I'm a fan of the zombie genre in general. But I did wonder to myself, how good could this film possibly be? Because it came out before George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and pretty much everybody in horror circles thinks that Night of the Living Dead was the birth of the zombie film as we know it. So why does nobody talk about Plague of the Zombies? I'd only heard of it quite recently. Thankfully though, having seen the film the other night, in my opinion, the reason why it's not that well known is because we get a different type of zombie in this film to the general type that we would get for like the next 50 years of cinema after Night of the Living Dead. The zombies in Plague of the Zombies are almost like gullible pets. You know, tell them to go and dig a rock wall and they'll be like, oh, okay then. And it's only really in the last 5 minutes that they sort of go a bit stir crazy and become like the zombies that we know and love today. Was George Romero partly inspired by the last 5 minutes of this movie? I don't know, because he's dead. Otherwise, I would email him. But certainly, if you look at the box, I mean, it sort of gives you the impression that it's a very Night of the Living Dead type movie. I mean, if you took out the words The Plague of the Zombie and replaced them with Night of the Living Dead, and if I just happened to see this in a supermarket, I would probably think, yeah, looks like they've done another re-release of Night of the Living Dead, at least assuming I didn't look too closely at this guy way over on the left. So to give you more of a synopsis about the film, we focus mainly on a guy called Sir James Forbes. He's a professor living in London with his daughter, and one day he gets a telegraph from a friend of his who lives in Cornwall, basically saying that a bunch of people in this particular Cornish village have started disappearing and developing strange ailments and cuts on their arms. So Forbes decides to answer the call and go to Cornwall with his daughter. He doesn't want to at first. He says, Cornwall? That's miles away. I would have thought that that was pretty obvious to somebody living in London. I mean, even if you live in Devon, the next county over from Cornwall, that's still technically miles away from Cornwall. But anyway, so they decide to get the train, although strangely in the next scene, they're taking a horse and carriage to Cornwall. So I don't know, were there just no trains running to Zombie Town that particular day? But eventually they do get there, and for the bulk of the rest of the film, Forbes and his daughter start to investigate what is going on in this village. And it turns out, and I'm going into spoilers here, in my opinion, it doesn't really affect your enjoyment of the movie, knowing what happens in this, but make your own mind up. I will give you 3 seconds to abort the video. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're carrying on. So it turns out that the squire of the village, the leader of it, he has been using voodoo to turn the locals into zombies and making them go and work in his local tin mine. So of course, Forbes starts investigating this, and by the end, he of course puts a stop to the zombie plague and the squire's evil capitalist fantasies. There are many ways that you could take the piss out of this film in a light-hearted way if you were of a mind to, but there's only really one genuine bit of criticism that I would throw its way, and that is the stupidly over-convoluted process that Squire Hamilton has to go through in order to procure for himself a zombie. So first of all, he has to identify a victim, and then he has to go up to them and pinprick their arm or their wrist in a way that doesn't have this person scampering off to the old bill. Then he has to leave them alone and go back to his tin mine and start the voodoo ceremony, which involves tipping some of the would-be victim's blood into a small little coffin with a voodoo doll inside. And then at this point, the would-be victim somehow telepathically knows that they have to walk to the tin mine, almost in like a sleepwalking sort of state. And when they get there, we're still not done. At this point, the squire has to get the would-be victim onto a table and then stab them, and then I think they become a zombie. It's too much. I mean, it's way over the top. I spent too much of this film pondering this process and the practicality of it rather than just enjoying the story. And I haven't even got to the Haitian drummers yet. So the squire has got these 3 drummers from Haiti, showing my ignorance when it comes to geography there, but he's presumably brought these three people over from Haiti. It's a long distance, that. It's miles away. I have to ask, why not just use three of his stooges to bang the drums? Unless this drumming beat is it has to be so precise that only really experienced people actually from Haiti could possibly pull it off. And if that's the case, then the whole process for creating a zombie in this film has just become complex to an absurd degree. For God's sake, man, just have the squire go to a graveyard, say a few incantations, and then the zombies come out of the ground. This is way too much what we have here. You know what? I think George Romero probably did watch this film, and I reckon he had the same criticism as me, and I reckon he was inspired to then do the counterpoint to this film and just decide to himself, I'm going to make a zombie film where there's no process. People just get up and start attacking people like zombies. So I reckon that Plague of the Zombies was the birth of George Romero in a funny way. Not that I'm knocking the director of this film, John Gilling. Apart from this one really severe weakness, I think the rest of the film is actually pretty enjoyable. I'm sort of familiar with Gilling a little bit. He did Shadow of the Cat in 1960 or 61, which was an alright sort of film, I guess. And after Plague of the Zombies, Gilling would go on to do The Mummy's Shroud, which I've not reviewed, but I sort of remember being alright from the one time I watched it, in a sort of slightly better than Shadow of the Cat type way. In terms of the actors, I only really recognise Andre Morrell in this film. He's been in quite a few Hammer films that I've seen. I never really used to notice him when he was in things like Hound of the Baskervilles, but then I saw him in Cash on Demand, and his performance in that was so good. I mean, ever since then, if I know that Andre Morrell's going to be in a film, it's like, oh yes, Andre Morrell's going to be in it. I would say right now that he is my third favourite actor in all of Hammer, and no prizes for guessing who the top two are. And I would also say that probably Morrell has peaked at this point. I don't see him going past number 3. Andre Morrell really earns his corn in this film. I mean, he was pushing 60 when he did this, and yet we see him get involved in a really energetic bout of fisticuffs at one point. In another scene, he's scampering around trying to avoid pyrotechnics. I totally get why eventually roles like this would become a young man's game or a young woman's game. I really like the banter between Forbes and his daughter early in the film. The scenes in the London house and in the horse and carriage are absolutely delightful. It's a shame that past a certain point in the story we don't really get this anymore, but I understand why that had to be. Squire Hamilton's quite a mediocre villain, I'd say, and I have to ask the question, so in the last third of the film, we finally see the fullness of his mind, and it's a really nice set. But he's got like 6 or 7 of these zombies digging away at the wall for whatever reason, and he's also paying like 6 or 7 of his lackeys to stand behind the zombies and just whip them. So I thought to myself, well, why not just dispense with the whole zombie scheme and just get the lackeys to do the digging? You would take out all the risk and still be paying out the exact same wages. Also, at the end of the film, it's quite funny because we get this situation where the zombies are set on fire because their little mini coffins upstairs in the house have been set on fire. That was quite a good story point, actually. But it becomes evident that there's only going to be time for one elevator trip out of this place before the whole place crumbles and burns. So, of course, the protagonists get onto the elevator. The lackeys don't make it because the zombies, once they go stir crazy and start becoming self-aware, they tend to go more for the lackeys than anyone else, which I get because I suppose in their limited brains, they would go for the people who have been whipping them this whole time. Now, Squire Hamilton has not been whipping these zombies, so they don't go for him, at least not straight away. But for some reason, Squire Hamilton doesn't make a beeline for the elevator. It's really noticeable. You can tell that this actor is looking for excuses not to run for the elevator. So he's got a clear path, it seems to me, and yet he just stands there like, and then a couple of shots later, for some reason, he's climbed up onto a rock ledge and just pressed his back against the wall. Again, why not just run for the elevator? Then he picks up a rock for some reason without a clear indication of what he's going to do with it. Again, he's not running for the elevator. And then finally, he gets sort of close to the elevator, but it's too late by this point, and we get that last glorious shot of him like, as the good guys get away. But he is absolutely, for many different reasons, the architect of his own downfall in this film. So I'll quickly bring up my copy of the Blu-ray one more time. Here it is. This was done by Studio Canal, a company who I'm quite sure produced quite a few Hammer Blu-rays from roughly the same period of time. So I'm certain in my own mind that Dracula Prince of Darkness was also done by Studio Canal in terms of the Blu-ray. That's a 1966 film as well. And I've just bought Rasputin to review in the forthcoming weeks. That's also a Studio Canal produced Blu-ray. So it's like they wanted to get in on the Hammer game, but they specifically asked for a whole bunch of unrelated Hammer films from the same time period for whatever reason. Anyway, looking at the features, there's no audio commentary, which is a shame, but there are a whole bunch of other really good features on here, which to my shame I've not checked out yet, and I really need to. So there's a documentary called Raising the Dead, which is all about the film. Apparently it's about 35 minutes long, and it's very, very good, at least according to the review of the Blu-ray that I read online. There's also something called World of Hammer episode, Mummies, Werewolves and the Living Dead. I've no idea what that's about, but probably worth checking out. And there's also something called the Restoration Comparison, and I'd like to see that as well, to be honest, because that would probably make me really appreciate just how good the picture is in this film compared to how it used to look years ago. So there we have it, Plague of the Zombies on Blu-ray. So I think we've reached the end of the review. It's now time to find out what score I'm going to give this film. So to do that, let's go to the Bag of Terror. And I've dropped one of the axes. But here it is. 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. A reasonable score. This is an alright movie. It's got one pretty bad weakness. One or two other things I would touch up. But I enjoyed it. It's funny in parts. It's not particularly scary, but it's a well-made Hammer film from the 60s. And it's sort of a shame, I guess, that they didn't do more zombie films. Right, I'll be back soon with that review of Rasputin that I was just mentioning a couple of minutes ago. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.